Okay, imagine the unthinkable. Seriously. The year is 410 CE, and Rome, the eternal city, I mean, the absolute heart of an empire that stood for 1,000 years, it's being sacked.
Yeah, the Visigoths under Alaric, they're just marching through the gates. And this isn't like a quick raid. It's 3 days. 3 days of brutal plunder.
It wasn't just a military loss somewhere far off. It was a psychological earthquake.
Yeah.
A total collapse of everything they thought was permanent, divinely protected even.
For Romans, the city wasn't just buildings. It was everything. Their identity, their sense of invincibility, their place in the cosmos.
And this wave of just sheer panic and despair, it washes across the entire Roman world. 1,000 years of certainty, just gone, shattered.
And the immediate reaction, well, people scrambled. They needed answers. And let's be honest, they needed someone to blame.
Right.
Pagans, still holding on to the old ways, and even some Christians, they were just in deep shock, deep anxiety.
The pagans were pretty quick to point fingers, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. They were loud about it. Look, They said, you abandoned the old gods, the gods who protected Rome for centuries. And now look, it's Christianity's fault. This new faith brought ruin.
So you've got this huge crisis, this feeling like the world's ending, and into this steps one of the most, truly influential thinkers ever, Augustine of Hippo.
Yeah, a brilliant mind, restless. And he takes on this monumental task, not just to defend Christianity against these accusations, but to offer comfort, a whole new way of seeing things.
He wanted to kind of redefine what society and human life are even about, right?
Exactly. His huge work, The City of God, it's not just arguing back, it argues for Christianity as a spiritual truth. It shifts the whole focus away from earthly empires, which, let's face it, rise and fall, towards something more lasting, a heavenly vision.
And that's really what we want to do in this deep dive. We've got your sources, the history, Augustine's own fascinating life, the really deep, sometimes tough ideas in the City of God.
Yeah, we're going to unpack the core insights. We want to help you connect the dots, see how this ancient text really did shape the world we live in now.
And how it still speaks to us.
Right.
To our own worries about society, about suffering, about finding meaning.
Absolutely. It's surprisingly relevant.
It feels revolutionary, even now.
Yeah.
Augustine wasn't just, playing defense. He was proposing a radically new way to understand history, society, purpose itself. So over this deep dive, we're going on a bit of a journey. We'll look at Augustine's own life from his, let's say, eventful youth.
Yeah, eventful is one word for it.
To becoming this revered bishop. We'll dive into the historical chaos of Rome's decline, the pagan world he was pushing against.
And we'll really get into his answers, his big answers to the huge questions, like why is there evil? Why do people suffer? What is true happiness anyway?
Yeah, the big ones. And we'll definitely unpack that famous idea of the two cities, the city of God, the city of man. It had such a massive impact.
Huge. It shaped Western thought for centuries. Still does, in some ways.
And we'll see how Augustine's insights, written so long ago, still kind of echo today. How they speak to our anxieties, our search for meaning when things feel unstable.
So yeah, let's get into it. Let's start unpacking.
Okay, so to really get the City of God, this massive work, you kind of have to get the man behind it first.
Augustine, absolutely. He was born in Tagaste, North Africa, modern-day Algeria, actually, back in 354 CE, Roman province.
And his early life. It wasn't exactly a quiet study, was it?
Not at all. It was vibrant, intellectual, sure, but also pretty wild. He had this intense curiosity, this drive for knowledge, but also, as he later admit very openly, a real taste for worldly pleasures.
He was smart, though. Really smart.
Oh, incredibly bright. His education, especially in rhetoric, the art of argument and persuasion, was absolutely key. It sharpened his mind, gave him the tools he'd later use so powerfully in his writing and preaching.
And we know a lot about this period because of his Confessions.
Right.
Which is still read all the time.
Yeah, the Confessions is our main window. But it's important to get what it is. It's not just like him spilling his deepest, darkest secrets for sensation.
Right, it's more philosophical.
Exactly. It's this intense self-examination. He's asking, who am I? Who is God? It's rigorous. Before his conversion, he talks about this pre-illumination sinfulness.
Which sounds serious.
It is, but it's not just about, specific bad deeds, though there were plenty of those by his own account. It was more about what he called an inordinate love of God-inferior things.
Okay, what does that mean exactly? Like loving bad things?
Not necessarily bad things, more like loving good things in the wrong way or too much. Prioritizing things like, say, sexual pleasure, ambition, power, even love for his family. Prioritizing those instead of loving God above all else.
So it's got getting your priorities mixed up. Misordered love.
Precisely. It's a misordering of the will, like your internal compass is pointing the wrong way. He realized humans are built to seek ultimate satisfaction, right? But when we aim that longing at these God-inferior things, things that are good but not the ultimate good, we end up with what he called a restless heart.
That famous phrase.
Yeah. This deep dissatisfaction, this ache that no amount of pleasure or success or even knowledge alone could fill. His own desperate search for satisfaction really shaped his later theology. He concluded that true peace, the final goal, is only found in the ultimate good that is God.
So all that searching, that restlessness, it eventually led to his conversion.
It did. A really dramatic experience he describes in the Confessions. It wasn't just changing his mind, it was a complete turnaround, a total reorientation of his life, his priorities, everything.
And he'd explored other philosophies before that, right? Manichaeism, Platonism.
Oh, yes. He was deeply involved with Manichaeism for a while, that dualistic view of good and evil as cosmic forces. And he was profoundly influenced by Platonism, particularly Neoplatonism. His conversion wasn't an anti-intellectual leap. It was the culmination of a long, intense intellectual and personal journey.
And after this conversion, things changed pretty quickly for him, career-wise, didn't they?
They did. He rose through the church ranks pretty fast. By 395 CE, he was made Bishop of Hippo Regius, which was a major port city back in North Africa.
So being a bishop put him right in the thick of things.
Absolutely. Right at the center of all the theological debates, the social challenges the early church was facing. Paganism was still strong. There were internal divisions, heresies.
Like the Donatist controversy?
Exactly. Big one in North Africa.
Yeah.
And he became this incredibly prolific writer, a powerful preacher. He was constantly engaging, tackling the big intellectual and practical issues of his day.
Which is why when Rome fell, his response wasn't just some private reflection, it was hugely influential.
Precisely. His position gave his words immense weight. He was already a major figure, and the city of God came directly out of that crisis.
Yeah, let's talk about that crisis. The sack of Rome, 410 CE. It's hard to overstate the shock, isn't it?
Almost impossible. We mentioned it was a psychological earthquake. This idea of the eternal city, divinely chosen 1,000 years, just falling to barbarians. The Visigoths. It was unthinkable. It sent shockwaves everywhere.
And Augustine points out this really fascinating irony in the middle of it all.
He does. He notes that many Romans actually survived because they fled to Christian churches, Christian holy sites. And the Visigoths, who were Arian Christians themselves mostly, they actually respected these places. They declared them sanctuaries.
So people were saved because of the Christian sites.
Right. Spared for Christ's sake, as Augustine puts it. Their lives were preserved because of this boon which they owe to the respect entertained for Christ. But then
they turn around and blame Christianity for Rome's fall.
Exactly. They reproach the Christian religion, blame Christ for the city's troubles, and chalk up their own survival to their own good luck, not divine providence, or even the barbarians' respect for Christian spaces.
Wow. The irony is thick.
It really is. And Augustine drives it home. He contrasts it with older accounts of war, like Virgil's description of the sack of Troy, where temples offered no protection, everyone was enslaved or killed. He's saying, look, the Christian influence actually brought a measure of mercy, even from enemies that wasn't there before. It's a brilliant piece of rhetoric.
Turning the accusation on its head. And he doesn't just defend Christianity, he also takes a hard look at Rome itself, doesn't he?
Yeah.
What was life really like before the fall?
Yeah, he goes there. He argues that long before Christianity became prominent, Rome, for all its impressive, admirable qualities, the buildings, the law, the legions, was already rotting from within. He quotes Rome's own writers, people like Sallust relaying Cato the Elder's words.
What did Cato say?
He painted this picture of deep moral decay, saying things like, instead of industry, just government, a mind free from crime or lust, we have luxury and avarice, poverty in the state, opulence among citizens. We laud riches. We follow laziness. There is no difference made between the good and the bad. All the rewards of virtue are got possession of by intrigue.
Wow. That sounds depressingly familiar, actually.
Doesn't it? Augustine's point is that this internal rot, this obsession with self-interest, pleasure, money, that's what left the Republic vulnerable. It wasn't an external enemy primarily. It was decay from within.
So this ties into his critique of Roman religion, too, the idea that the old gods weren't actually helping.
Directly. He basically asks, if your guardian gods were so great, why didn't they give you any moral guidance? Why didn't they provide precepts of morals to stop all this corruption and the endless brutal civil wars?
Like the wars involving Marius, Sulla, the Gracchi.
Exactly. Periods of horrific internal bloodshed. Where were the gods then? Augustine argues these pagan gods, or demons as he calls them, didn't care about Roman morality. They only wanted worship, sacrifices, fear. They actually encouraged an abandoned life as long as the rituals kept coming.
He even criticizes worshiping felicity, like happiness is a goddess.
Yeah, he calls it folly. True happiness, he insists, is a gift of God. You seek it from him, not some empty idol. And he points out the hypocrisy. Roman society looked down on the actors who performed in the often lewd, immoral plays that were staged to honor these very gods.
That is pretty hypocritical.
Even Plato, a pagan philosopher, wanted to ban poets whose stories made the gods look bad. Augustine says, look, Plato had better morals than the gods these Romans worship, gods who apparently demanded these debasing shows. His zinger is, the majesty of God cannot be propitiated by that which defiles the dignity of man.
Powerful stuff. So, okay, Rome falls, panic, Christians get blamed. Augustine writes City of God to say, hold on, it's not that simple. Rome decayed from within. And actually, Christianity showed a better way, even in the midst of disaster.
That's the core argument in response to the immediate crisis, yes.
Yeah.
He uses the sanctuary example as proof that Christianity had a positive influence, tempering even the violence of the sack.
And looking deeper into Roman society, the sources he uses paint a pretty grim picture, long before 410. All those internal wars.
Oh, relentless, deplorable wars, as the sources put it. Even after they built a temple of Concord to try and foster peace, you had more uprisings, more political violence, Saturninus Drusus, than the huge social wars that devastated Italy.
And the slave revolt led by Spartacus.
Right, the Servile War. Started by just a handful of gladiators, maybe 70 or so, and it exploded, defeating Roman armies, ravaging the countryside. Imagine the fear that struck, and then constant piracy messing with trade and safety.
So it wasn't exactly a peaceful, stable utopia before the Visigoths showed up.
Far from it. Constant battles, endless bloodshed. That was the price of empire. Internal instability was baked in. It gives context to Augustine's argument about internal decay.
So against that violent backdrop, Augustine is subtly saying Christianity offered something different, a source of moral strength.
Implicitly, yes. That mercy shown in the churches during the sack, that sparing for Christ's sake, it's presented as evidence of a new spirit entering the world. He's reframing success. Rome's true achievement wasn't its empire, he suggests, but the potential for spiritual and moral growth offered by Christianity.
And this leads him to redefine virtue itself, moving away from the old Roman ideals.
Completely. He contrasts Roman heroes with Christian ideals. Think of figures like Brutus or Torquatus, praised in Rome for killing their own sons for the Republic, for liberty, for human praise. Earthly glory was the goal.
Pretty harsh standard.
Extremely. But Augustine flips it. He asks, okay, if they could do that for dying men and human praise, isn't it far greater to care for Christ's poor ones, seeing them as our sons, for the sake of true liberty, freedom from sin, death, the devil?
That's a radical shift in focus.
It is. Or take Furius Camillus, saved Rome from the Gauls, even though they'd treated him badly because he wanted that life of glory. Augustine contrasts him with a Christian who endures injury even from within the church, from fellow believers, yet still defends the church against heresy because eternal life is found there, nowhere else. It's not about earthly fame, it's about ultimate salvation.
So it's a move from external honor to internal righteousness.
Yeah.
From earthly republic to heavenly kingdom.
Exactly, a fundamental shift in the goal of human life and virtue.
It's interesting how he doesn't just trash Rome, though. He acknowledges their admirable deeds.
Right, he respects the history, but he probes the motivations. He bridges the pagan past and the Christian present by reevaluating the purpose behind actions. True flourishing, he argues, isn't about building empires or pleasing fickle gods for earthly rewards. It's about aligning your will with God's will, seeking that heavenly city.
And suffering. Misfortune, how does that fit in?
He sees it through the lens of divine providence. It's not random chaos or divine anger, necessarily. It's God working. Maybe it's chastisement to reform depraved manners in the wicked. Or for the righteous, it's a test, a refinement, preparing them for a better world or keeping them here for God's ulterior purposes. Everything has meaning within God's plan.
Which brings us squarely into those huge questions he tackles. Let's start with a big one. Suffering. Why do bad things happen to good people? It's the question everyone asks.
It really is. And Augustine's answer, rooted in that idea of divine providence, is that it's never meaningless. It's not random.
Okay, so for the wicked, you said it's like a correction, a wake-up call.
Yeah, a chastisement is his word. a chance to reform depraved manners. Painful, maybe, but purposeful, aimed at turning them back.
But for the righteous, the good people who suffer, that's harder to understand.
For them, he says, it's not punishment, it's more like exercise. Afflictions exercise and test their faith, their virtue. It refines them.
Refines them for what?
Either it prepares them for a better world, meaning they're ready for eternal life, or God keeps them here on earth for ulterior purposes. Maybe they need to be an example, or maybe they have a role to play in God's larger plan that we just can't see. The point is, it always serves a purpose in God's design, even if it's hidden from us.
That's a challenging perspective, but it gives suffering meaning, I suppose.
It does. It counters the idea that suffering means God has abandoned you, or that he doesn't care, or that life is just random cruelty.
Okay, from suffering to evil itself. You mentioned Augustine had this really radical idea about what evil actually is. Not a force, but something else.
Right. This is core Augustinian thought. Evil isn't a thing. It's not a substance God created. It's a privation, a deficiency, a lack of good.
Like, darkness is the absence of light.
Exactly like that. Or silence is the absence of sound. Or, his example, blindness is the absence of sight. Sight is the good, the positive reality. Blindness is the lack of that good. Evil is the lack of the good that should be there in a creature or a situation.
So God didn't create evil.
No, because evil isn't a created thing. It's a corruption, a falling away from the good that God did create. Remember, Augustine wrestled with Manichaeism, which saw evil as this co-eternal power fighting against good. He completely rejected that.
So where does the evil will come from then, if it's not created?
It comes from defection from God. It's not a positive cause, it's a failure. Imagine something created good, oriented towards God, like a perfectly made instrument. If that instrument chooses to play out of tune, to turn away from the music it was made for, that turning away, that choice is the origin of the dissonance. The will, created good, chooses to defect from the highest good, which is God.
And in doing that, it damages itself.
Yes, the good of their nature is diminished and corrupted when the will turns away. He says, vice cannot but damage nature. And crucially, the fact that a will can become wicked proves its original goodness. You can only corrupt something that was good to begin with. The wicked will is a strong proof of the goodness of the nature.
That's a fascinating twist. Okay, so from evil as privation, let's talk about original sin. How does that first defection affect everyone?
Hugely. He starts by asking if Adam and Eve felt things like fear or grief before they sinned. His answer is no. They were in a state of perfect blessedness, perfect harmony. Negative emotions like that only came after the fall, as a consequence of sin.
And sin itself isn't just the outward act, right? It's deeper.
Much deeper. It's about the will. He says sin is when you desire those things which the law of God forbids, even if you resist acting on them purely out of fear of punishment, not through love of righteousness. That inner desire, that disordered love, is already a turning away, already sin.
So the first sin, the disobedience in the garden, what were the consequences?
He talks about two deaths. First, the immediate death of the soul. That happens when God forsakes the soul. Remember Adam hiding from God. That's the symbol, the intimate connection, the life-giving presence is broken.
And the second death?
The death of the body. When the soul eventually forsakes the body, dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. Augustine argues these two deaths aren't just natural, they are the inevitable consequence, the just penalty for that first rebellion.
So physical death itself is a result of sin, in his view.
Yes. We are subject to the death of the body, not by the law of nature, and by his righteous infliction on account of sin. And crucially, this inclination towards sin and the consequence of death gets passed down. The propagation of sin and death comes to all of humanity by ordinary generation. We all inherit this tendency. We bear the image of the earthly man.
Wow, that's a heavy inheritance. Given this focus on sin, the soul, the heavenly city, what did Augustine think about actual earthly politics?
Yeah.
Christian rulers. Was it just about waiting for the end?
That's a really important point. He didn't just dismiss earthly life, but for him, the Christian message is fundamentally spiritual rather than political. The main game is the mystical heavenly city, the New Jerusalem, not earthly power struggles.
So what's the role of government then? Just keep the peace?
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
Maintain enough order so people can pursue the spiritual life. He redefines sacrifice. It's not just rituals. True sacrifice is every work which is done that we may be united to God in holy fellowship. It all has to point towards that supreme good and end.
Even acts of mercy.
Even mercy, if it's not done for God's sake, out of love for God, expressing itself in love for neighbor, it's not true sacrifice. Our whole lives, even chastening our bodies through temperance for God's sake, can be a living sacrifice.
So Christian governance, if it exists, should primarily aim to help people seek God, not build a perfect earthly kingdom.
Exactly. It's about facilitating the journey towards the city of God, not trying to build it here on earth. Earthly politics is necessary, maybe, but secondary. Its goal is relative peace, not ultimate salvation.
Okay, this leads us straight into maybe his most famous idea. The two cities, city of God, city of man.
Yes, absolutely central to the whole work. These aren't necessarily literal cities, but two societies, two communities defined by their ultimate love and destiny, living intermingled throughout history.
So the earthly city that's like Rome.
Rome is a prime symbol, yes. He calls it the mistress of the nations, but adds, pointedly, that it's itself ruled by its lust of rule. It's about self-glory, earthly power, calling their lands after their own names. It seeks temporary renown, and he warns, will ultimately face God's judgment.
And the city of God.
That's incomparably more glorious than Rome. Its hallmarks aren't earthly power, but for victory, truth, for dignity, holiness, for peace, felicity, for life, eternity. Its citizens are like strangers in this world, pilgrims heading towards their true home.
He uses Bible stories to illustrate this, right? Cain and Abel, Abraham's descendants.
He does. Cain, the builder of the first earthly city, represents the earthly lineage, driven by earthly concerns, the son of possession. Seth's line represents those who hoped to call upon the name of the Lord God. Later, he contrasts Abraham's carnal seed, Ishmael, the sons of Keturah, symbolizing those focused on earthly inheritance or perhaps heretical groups, with the spiritual seed through Isaac, the children of the promise gathered in Christ who inherit the true heavenly kingdom. It's about spiritual lineage, not just bloodlines.
In driving these two cities, defining them really, are those two fundamental loves we touched on earlier.
That's the absolute key. The city of man is built on love of self, even to the contempt of God. It's that inordinate love of God-inferior things, again, prioritizing pleasure, power, self, family, anything above God. It's fundamentally self-centered.
And the city of God.
Built on the opposite, love of God, even to the contempt of self. Not self-hatred, but a willingness to put God's will above one's own desires and ego. This love leads to that holy fellowship with God, finding true happiness only by being very near to God. These two loves are the engines driving human history, according to Augustine.
And they lead to very different destinations.
Yeah.
Heaven and hell.
Starkly different. Those in the city of God, through faith and God's grace, experience the first resurrection, now that spiritual renewal turning from sin. Because of that, the second death, eternal damnation, has no power over them. Their end is eternal life, blessedness with God.
But those who haven't had that spiritual change.
Those who haven't lived until the 1,000 years be finished, his symbolic way of saying they haven't experienced that first spiritual resurrection in this life, will face the second resurrection, the resurrection of the body at the end of time, but only for judgment. They pass with his flesh into the second death, eternal separation from God, and he's blunt. Hellfire is eternal. Eternity isn't always good.
So this whole framework, two cities, two loves, a definitive end. This is what makes him the first Christian philosopher of history. It changed everything.
Massively. He completely demolishes the common pagan idea of history as endless cycles. Revolving cycles that restore all things as they were, where everything just repeats forever, a cosmic rerun.
Which sounds kind of pointless, really.
Exactly. Augustine argues, no, history is linear. It has a beginning, creation, a turning point, the fall, a central event, Christ's incarnation, death, and resurrection, and it's moving towards a definite, unique end point, final judgment, heaven or hell.
And God's plan drives this linear history.
Yes. It unfolds according to God's absolutely unchangeable and eternal design. God isn't surprised by things. He's not changing his mind. It's all part of one sovereign plan. He even tackles the argument that God couldn't possibly know infinite things by saying God's knowledge comprehends all incomprehensibles, even infinite numbers. So no need for cycles for God to keep track. This linear view gave history meaning, purpose, direction. It's foundational for how the West understood time and history for well over 1,000 years.
Okay, within this historical drama, this clash of cities, Augustine also talks about spiritual warfare, right? Good versus evil playing out.
He does, but always remember his definition of evil. It's a corruption, an absence of good. It's not an equal power fighting God.
So demons and evil spirits.
They fit that model. He calls them miserable animals subject to distorted emotions like anger, pride, envy, perturbations of mind, just like fallen humans. They lack true reason, true blessedness. He scorns the madness of worshiping them or seeking their help, saying true religion should free us from becoming like them in their depravity.
He sees them as deceptive.
Highly deceptive. Full of contrivances, capable of assuming all forms, simulating gods, demons, and dead men. Their goal is to trick humanity, to make wickedness easy, and to block those trying to live virtuously. But their power comes from human weakness and deception, not inherent strength against God.
So if demons are active, how does God's providence work? Does he just let them cause chaos?
No, Augustine insists God remains sovereign. Even evil wills, human or demonic, operate within the bounds of God's ultimate plan. He famously says God makes a good use even of evil wills.
How does that work?
His example is the devil. The devil chose evil, was cast down, but God allows his temptations to actually benefit those whom he wishes to injure by them. Meaning, resisting temptation, through God's grace, strengthens the believer. God can turn the enemy's intended harm into good for his people. It shows God's ultimate control. Nothing happens outside his knowledge and permission, and he can weave even evil into his good purposes.
So these spiritual battles have real-world consequences in kingdoms and societies.
Absolutely. Augustine draws a sharp line. True religion demands worship of the one true God, and forbids worshiping the multitude of false gods, which are really demons seeking illicit worship.
And miracles, how do they fit in?
True miracles, performed by God or his true angels, are done to commend the worship of the one true God. They point to the Creator. Demonic marvels, on the other hand, are performed so that they themselves may be supposed to be God. They're counterfeits, designed to deceive and draw worship away from the true God. Knowing the difference, focusing worship on the Creator alone is crucial for finding the way to life eternal.
This whole picture, good versus evil as privation, divine providence controlling everything, the two cities clashing, spiritual warfare. It's easy to see how they shaped the medieval world.
Oh, profoundly. It became the dominant framework for understanding reality, human nature, sin, grace, history, politics, everything, really. For centuries in Western Christendom, Augustine's influence is just immense.
And it's not just medieval history, is it? That influence stretches right up to today. The city of God still casts a very long shadow.
It really does. In modern Catholic thought, for instance, especially social teaching, his ideas about the relationship between the church and the world, the sacred and the secular, are still foundational. That core idea that the church's primary mission is spiritual rather than political, focused on the mystical heavenly city, remains incredibly important.
It provides a theological grounding for the church having a distinct role, separate from direct political rule.
Exactly. A non-coercive mission focused on salvation, not temporal power.
And looking around at our world today, the political turmoil, the arguments about values, the feeling sometimes that things are unstable, Augustine's analysis feels surprisingly relevant.
It really does. His descriptions of a society potentially destroyed by profligacy or ruled by its lust of rule, or Cato's warnings about luxury, greed, and corruption undermining the state.
You hear echoes of those concerns in modern debates all the time.
All the time. And Augustine's fundamental response to crisis, that true strength isn't ultimately found in political power or wealth, but in spiritual grounding, in moral character, in aligning with God, that offers a powerful counter-narrative for us today when we face uncertainty or perceived decline.
It speaks to our personal anxieties too, doesn't it? That restless heart idea.
Absolutely. The search for meaning beyond just consuming things, beyond fleeting pleasures, that feeling of dissatisfaction despite having so much. Augustine diagnosed that 1600 years ago. It resonates deeply with modern alienation and the search for something more.
And his idea of inordinate love, loving lesser things too much, that explains a lot about human behavior, doesn't it? Why we chase things that don't ultimately satisfy.
It provides a powerful framework for understanding addiction, obsession, misplaced priorities, all sorts of self-defeating patterns. And other aspects too, like his call for intellectual humility, recognizing the limits of our knowledge, the unknowable mystery of things. That's a valuable antidote to the kind of dogmatism and polarization we often see today.
And the idea of conscience, being morally responsible agents.
Yes, understanding how we become agents in the morally relevant sense is crucial in any era, but especially now with complex ethical choices around technology, society, everything.
And finally, that separation he makes, the spiritual versus the political focus of Christianity, That still fuels debates about church and state, doesn't it?
Constantly. His arguments provide a key historical and theological reference point for discussions about the proper role of religion in public life, the limits of state power, and the church's unique non-political mission. Whether people agree with him or not, his ideas are still very much part of that conversation.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive, what Augustine did was just immense. He took the crisis of Rome's fall and used it to reframe everything: suffering, evil, history, human purpose, shifting the focus from earthly power to eternal destiny.
Yeah, the city of God isn't just history. It's this timeless look at our dual citizenship, you know? Citizens of earth, yes, but potential citizens of heaven. And that constant tension between the two loves, love of self versus love of God, is always playing out.
And his core message seems to be that real strength, real happiness for individuals and societies comes from aiming higher, from connecting with that ultimate good, not just chasing power or pleasure.
That's the heart of it. It's a profound challenge, as relevant now as it was in the 5th century.
So we'll leave you with a question to think about, drawing directly from Augustine. If, as he argued, a society gets into deep trouble, becomes utterly wicked and dissolute, when its people prioritize luxury, greed, and self-interest over things like justice, hard work, and good governance, what does that tell you about what truly makes a society flourish in any time, including right now?
It's definitely something worth pondering. What are the real foundations?
A powerful question indeed. We hope you'll share your thoughts on this, continue the conversation about Augustine's enduring ideas. We really enjoyed digging into this with you.
Yeah, it's been great. Looking forward to the next deep dive.